Hello, welcome to the Moon Scarab channel. My name is Ramon, and today we're diving into the world of Santa Muerte, known as La Niña Bonita, La Blanca, La Flaca, and most widely, La Santísima Muerte. And I'm honored to share this topic with a remarkable guest. Joining me is Dr. Cressida Stone, an expert in this amazing topic. She holds a doctorate from the University of Oxford in England and has immersed herself in Mexico's spiritual traditions, apprenticing under brujos and shamans. She is the author of the fascinating book Secrets of Santa Muerte, a guide to the prayers, spells, rituals, and hexes. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us, Dr. Stone, sharing with us this fascinating topic of Santa Muerte.
Thank you so much, Ramon, for inviting me.
It's great to talk to you. I watched so many videos on, interviews of you sharing your knowledge, your expertise of Santa Muerte. I don't know what came first, if it was the interviews and then I got the book, or I found the book and then I found the interviews. But I'm telling you, I had so many books on the topic of Santa Muerte, but this one has been amazing because it's one of those books that you just can't, read and put back in your shelf. It's a guide. It's a resource that I find myself going back to over and over again, and it's really enriched my practice and knowledge of this spiritual being that has brought so much to my life and to so many people around the world. And your contribution on this has been amazing. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. But really, it's just the work of Santa Muerte. I was just a channel, nothing more. I was just channeling the information that she wanted me to write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
So, as you mentioned, I went to Oxford University where I studied anthropology, which is the study of humans, the study of culture. And specifically, I was always interested in the anthropology of religion. And in fact, I began my research in Mali. Later, I went to Senegal, where I was looking at practices of witchcraft and also looking at Sufi traditions. But there were just certain places as a woman that I couldn't go to. And I felt excluded because of my gender. And there was just something lacking there for me. And I'd studied so many different religions on this trajectory of mine. And it wasn't until I went to Mexico and went to my first temple of La Santísima Muerte that just something incredible happened to me as I stared into the eyes of death. Just, it was as if everything in my life came together at once. And this beautiful Sabia, wise woman, came out of the chapel. And we had this incredible conversation. And she gave me my first Santa Muerte statue, a red statue, a Niña Roja. And I always joke that she made me fall in love with her, because after that, I just couldn't stop going back to Mexico, and especially to see her. And she introduced me to her family, who are all devotees, to curanderos. She's Zapotec, she's indigenous. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, I want to dedicate this podcast to her. She's the most incredible woman. She is now, we don't know how old she is because she was born in the
Mm-hmm.
Sierra, in the mountains, not in a hospital. But she is just this incredible repository of indigenous knowledge and knowledge around death. And honestly, I couldn't have even been on this podcast or known anything about Santísima Muerte if it weren't for the guidance that she gave me. And it really feels like I have a past life connection with her, and indeed her entire family. She had a granddaughter exactly of my age. And just things flowed so beautifully that it was just like a fairy tale unfolding. And then I had my own near-death experience, which really just took me a step deeper to where, initially this might have been an academic journey. That was the goal initially. But I had always been a spiritual person. As a child, I had precognitive dreams. I met this tarot reader who gifted me a deck and said, you have a gift. But through the years of academic study, that had kind of been taken away from me, because you're encouraged to work, within rational epistemologies, right? Western frameworks that discard magic, that discard spirituality, and try and explain them away in terms of other things. But this whole experience with Santa Muerte not only taught me to appreciate life and death, but also to re-immerse myself in my own spirituality and my own gifts.
That is amazing. And that led you to write the book, right?
It took me a while to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I was writing all this academic stuff, because Cressida Stone is just a pseudonym.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole long story behind that. But Cressida means gold, and
Gold.
stone obviously is a stone, right? So I wanted
Uh-huh.
to have in my book gold stone. So nuggets of gold. I wanted there to be just spiritual gold in my book. So that's why I chose that name. But initially, there was absolutely no desire to write. I never even thought I'd write Secrets of Santa Muerte. It was never
Mm-hmm.
even on my horizon in the faintest of ways. I was writing all this academic work, and I met a witch who told me, you really should write a book for practitioners. And I didn't feel comfortable at that time because I hadn't fully immersed myself and I didn't feel learned enough. And I felt that I needed to gain more spiritual knowledge and really discover the path of Santa Muerte. And I still feel with her that I'm always learning more things, about
Mm-hmm.
the metaphysics of death and magic and all these things. But eventually she convinced me to submit a couple of chapters to Wiser Press. And this was Judica Illis. I'm so grateful to her. She was the one who told me that this would be a great idea. And she loved it, because there had been a book by Tracy Rollins, but Tracy, I don't want to go into details, but has not been available to
Mm-hmm.
write a second book. So yeah, I submitted 3 chapters. And after that, the book basically wrote itself. It was just a labor of love.
It is, and it feels that way. It doesn't feel like a book. Well, first of all, it's a guide. I see it as a guide. It doesn't feel forced. The energy flows so naturally. There is a sequence, there's an emotional arch, but at the same time, it connects with the person who is reading it. It's even if you're someone who's devoted to Santa Muerte, wants to learn more, or just someone who is exploring the topic. There is something spiritual that you connect with, and like I said, I love your book so much. I have the paper copy and I have the audiobook, and I listen and read it all the time. And I
I
always
wanted,
get,
sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted it to be an altar book, right? Because you're mentioning
mm-hmm,
energy. I wanted it to be a book that people could keep on their altar, that would be imbued with the energy of Santa Muerte.
which I do,
People
which
have
I
told
do.
me really strange stories about the book. Like I've had so many
Mm-hmm.
stories of people seeing orbs over it. One devotee told me they put it on their altar and their altar literally started shaking. Just so many different interesting
It
experiences.
is. And it's interesting you mention it because I actually have it by my altar. I have my altar right here in front of me, and I keep my book close to it. And it's very powerful being able to be close to that sacred space and read this rich book, which is amazing. How has your perspective on Santa Muerte evolved over time from the moment you wrote it until today?
My perspective has really changed because obviously I started out as an academic
Hmm.
looking, which is really great, looking into all the ethno-archaeological data, reading as much as I could on her, and also her indigenous origins, which to me, are really, really fascinating, much as there is a Catholic element to her. And she is absolutely syncretic. She is a
Hmm.
melange, a bricolage of different cultures and traditions come together. She is also, in my understanding, deeply indigenous also in her in the epistemology, in the worldview that people have around life and death, which, you know, I've come to understand. Because when I first started on this mission with her, I was reading all this academic work, and it said that she's death personified. Death personified was what so many people were writing. And I realized that that was just wrong. I realized as I perused the academic I started doing ethno-archaeological research, looking at the codices, right? What are the codices? These are sacred texts, sometimes historical texts by the Aztec, by the Maya. They're these kinds of books that were made from deer skin, sometimes, and also a kind of bark that they would dry and use as paper. And within these books, you know, they recorded history, but also ritual. So I started to examine all these things, and then I started to think about all the things that Doña Elena, this amazing sabia, was teaching me every time I went to Mexico, and also working with other curanderos. I want to mention Yuri Mendez in Cancun. If you're ever in Cancun, she has a beautiful chapel there. Soraya Redondo has a chapel in Tula de Hidalgo. Of course, the most famous person in Santa Muerte, Doña Queta. Romero has a shrine in Mexico City, which is absolutely beautiful. But I started to just put all these pieces of the puzzle together and realize that Santa Muerte is not death personified. She is both life and death.
Yeah. And everything in between, because there's so many aspects of Santa Muerte that she touches on. She represents a lot of things that we go to for. You know, we have Santa Muerte related with love, passion, spirituality, legal. So it's not just life and death, but everything that goes in between.
But all these things that you mentioned are life and death. So when we work with her, we can sort of hex people or ask for certain things to be less in our life, so less suffering. So we're kind of drawing on the more deathly side. But when we're asking for love, passion, success in business, we're basically asking her to put life into those areas of our existence that are lacking. So it's almost like, you know, she's very tied to the moon. She's very lunar. It's almost we can ask to wax, or we can ask to wane certain things in our life or in other people's lives. So that's why I see her as inherently both life and death, which are inextricable in many Mesoamerican traditions. You know, and we see this with Mictlantecuhtli, right, who is the indigenous Aztec goddess of death, who presides over the underworld. But the underworld is not seen as something evil. It's not like hell, right, in Christian traditions. The underworld is a kind of cosmic womb in a way, because if we look at the Aztec mythology, there are stories about Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, going down to the underworld. And there he is sent on a mission. He encounters bones. And it is the job of Mictlantecuhtli to look after these bones. She is the protectress of these bones. And because as the protectress of these bones are not just as we would see them, you know, parts of human bodies. In this Aztec mythology, they are the seeds of life. It is from bones, from decay, from decayed humans that life can be reborn. So as the protectress of bones, she is both preserving life and also looking after death. So in the story of Quetzalcoatl, he goes down to the underworld, he collects these bones, and then they're ground up to kind of make a paste. In some versions, they're mixed with maize, but specifically, he slices his penis and he bleeds it to get the blood, and he mixes it with these bones. And this is how the current humans that, you know, inhabit this earth are made in this mythology. So here we see that life and death are so interconnected, and it's a kind of cyclical. It's almost like the Buddhist, you know, Hindu, Eastern traditions, where life and death are understood as cyclical, as part of each other. It's not like in Catholicism, where death is about end, finality. And that's why I think we can work so well with Santa Muerte, because with this life and death, because in this cycle of life, things have to die for us to be reborn. Right now, we're in the year
Mm-hmm.
of the snake, right? Which is really
Yes.
interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if you look at depictions of Mictacasihuatl, and this is my little snake bangle in honor of that, she wears a belt made of serpents. And in Christian mythology, the serpent is evil, right? In the Garden
Mm-hmm.
of Eden, the serpent kind of lures Eve, has her get this apple which Adam eats, and then that causes death and
Mm-hmm.
sin. And so death, sin, the snake, Eve, they're all seen as evil, right? But within these indigenous traditions, we often find the serpent, such as in the case of Mictacasihuatl, the serpent is about death and rebirth. It's about wisdom. And so in this year of the snake, I think that there's just so much magic work to be done around working with not only Santa Muerte, but we can also work with the spirit of the snake alongside Santa Muerte, asking to shed that which we do not need, whether it's bad habits,
Mm-hmm.
toxic people, whatever it is, so that we can be reborn. So in this mythology, death is about rebirth. It's a positive thing. It's not like in the Christian tradition. So that's where, even though Santa Muerte is a syncretic faith, both Catholic and Indigenous, the view of death, life and death is very, very different. And I find very enriching.
It's very different. And the first time I went to Mexico, I was amazed with how normal and natural it is for the Mexican culture to have depictions of skeletons, skulls, all that motif, which here, it's in a different culture, we see it in a totally negative way. And it's beautiful, it's elegant, it's celebrated, it's not feared, it's understood as part of life. And the contrast, when I saw that, I was in shock.
Well, as I mentioned, we need to understand her as life and death combined.
Hmm.
But also, we can work in, I would say, different ways with her as opposed to working with Christian saints, where we would be afraid to work, say, with body fluids or in more occult ways. In the sense that, one topic I really want to touch on, which has annoyed me a lot, is people saying that you shouldn't work with blood and Santa Muerte, which to me is just, I hate to say it, but so ignorant. Blood is so essential to Santa Muerte practice. Now, I do talk about the blood pact in my book, and that's not for everyone. That's if you want
Hmm.
to make a lifelong bond with her. But, we can work with body fluids with Santa Muerte, like blood, like menstrual blood, if you're, have that, semen. All these things are very natural within this tradition. And I think this all hails from this indigenous past. We just saw the story, the mythology of Quetzalcoatl, right, going down into the underworld. When I was in Mexico City, I love to every time I go to the Museo de Antropología. And there they have all
Hmm.
these bloodletting instruments because, blood was so essential within spiritual ritual. And it was seen as a force that animated the cosmos, right? So people routinely would give blood offerings to ancestors, to deities. So I think all of these people being really against the use of blood, they're trying to sort of colonize Santa Muerte in a way, or make this into a holy Christian faith, which is not. I think the thing that's beautiful about Santa Muerte is because it's non-dualistic. It's not about judgment. It's not about saying this is evil or this is sin, or working with blood, that's wrong. I think it's I think it's a desire for people around the world, and not just, in Mexico, but people such as myself, to get back to a more pagan, almost primal understanding of religion that is more primordial, more atavistic, that has a pre-Christian element to it, that connects us strongly, to ancestors, to the earth and to ourselves as well, and to our bodies. Because, within Christian religion, particularly for women, the female body is seen as something taboo. Menstrual blood, for example, is seen as very dirty and impure, and it kind of precludes women from positions of power within the Catholic Church. This is why a woman can never be a pope or a priest, right?
Hmm.
But within Santa Muerte traditions, we don't have this kind of judgment because we have the indigenous background going on, which is about owning your body in a way and using your body as a powerful vessel. Your body can become sacred in these rites. Your body can become empowered. You don't have to feel sinful about your body. So I find that the indigenous aspects really make this faith very liberating for
And profound.
women, profound for people, members of the
Hmm.
LGBTQ community as well, who've also been ostracized from the Catholic Church. And so, we see a lot of use of body fluid in Santa Muerte sex magic, for example. I know some people just like to use blood even when they're hexing because they feel, my blood is carrying my force, my energy right now, so I want to use it. So anybody that's saying that using blood is wrong really doesn't understand Santa Muerte's indigenous origins and how blood is such an integral part. Body fluids are an integral part and always have been of indigenous religion.
No, and it's blood is such an individual marker. We use it in DNA identification. It's something that is so unique. When I read that part of the book, that was like a bomb because I there was so many things that it made me aware of, and one of them was the intimate connection with blood. And the other one that was very impactful was when you set up your altar, don't have anything else other than Santa Muerte. When I set my altar the first time, I had her and another lunar figure from another culture. And I have to say, after I cleared the space, cleaned it, and had everything just Santa Muerte, the energy flows differently.
And
And
I want to remind people that an altar it's a portal to that
mhm,
energy. It's what you can call an axis mundi. Axis mundi are prevalent in all religions. This is a ubiquitous thing. An axis mundi is something that, we could almost use Christian terms here, connects the heavens to the earth or the
mhm,
celestial to the underworld. And so your altar is a living axis mundi. It's a way for you to connect the realms and to connect
mhm.
to those realms yourself through the power of Santa Muerte. So it's really essential that the energy there is that you know how to work with it, know how to bond with Santa Muerte in the right way. And indeed, the Axis Mundi was a really important, there's a tree in, I think it's both Aztec and even Mayan mythology have these trees, which are the Axis Mundi that connect the heavens to the earth. So the underworld to the celestial. So I want people to think of their altar as a living space emanating energy. And I've literally gone to my altar in the night and I've kind of seen these, it's very hard to put into words, but these kind of flows, these waves of energy coming out from it. And I think that we build up that power in our altar by connecting with Santa Muerte, by inviting her spirit into our statues, but indeed into our space and honoring her. And it's very important to know how to work with your altar, as I explain in my book, because if you're hexing or if you're healing, you want that energy in your altar to be different. And so
Mhm.
learning how to work with Santissima Muerte, how to work with her on your altar is absolutely integral to your practice.
Definitely, because it's the personal connection you make with her. That's where you bring your offerings. That's why, like you said, it's a portal between divinity, between her and you.
Mhm.
Um, One story, my altar is sacred to me. I make my offerings to her constantly. I have I'm gonna share a photo of my altar, but I have a cup of water, and that cup of water has bubbles, and those bubbles has stayed floating there for like the longest time. It's incredible. And one story related to your book was that one day, I asked Santa Muerte for a favor, and she always responds, and I offered her that I wanted to bring her something. And I wasn't sure what to offer. And I was listening to your audiobook, and in one part of it, you mentioned red roses. I can't remember right now the context, but I said, red roses. And I usually refer to Santa Muerte as Madrecita, and I walked into the supermarket and went to the flower section and grabbed like this among so many sets of roses. There was this one that really attracted me, and it was radiating of such beautiful energy. And this lady, out of nowhere, she said, "Your mother's gonna love those roses." And I did not like, out of nowhere, and I understood that that was the sign to be able to offer to her. And nowadays, when people refer to the devotion as Santa Muerte, they talk about it as a new emerging religion, but that's not the case. This is a tradition that's been going on for pre-Columbian times, even before, even around the world in different cultures. But it wasn't always like that. There's been important figures that brought this to the forefront, and we can't have this conversation without talking about Doña Queta. And I wanted to ask you how her figure, how her experience has played a crucial role in revitalizing Santa Muerte's worship.
So she is a fascinating woman, a real, what they call cabrona, right? A real badass. Like, you'll go speak to her and she looks, the media will paint her as a sweet grandma, but she's just effing and jeffing, swearing, saying bad words, and she's so straight to the point. And I love her. And indeed, I've noticed that with all the female figures that have altars, they are just such strong, inspiring women that it gives you strength and inspiration to be around them. But she is very well known because, of course, Santa Muerte veneration has been going on for a long time. As you mentioned, probably for hundreds and thousands of years, the worship of death in different cultures across the world. But in the form of Santa Muerte, while a lot of people were worshiping her in private and in the silence and secrecy of their homes, she is a figure who in 2001, after her son was freed from jail, she decided to move her altar, which she had in her kitchen, where she sold quesadillas. Local people would come in, they would buy quesadillas. She decided, her son gifted her a huge statue and she couldn't very well fit it in the kitchen. So she decided to put it outside, sort of in her window that looks out onto the street. And there on out, people started just coming from far and wide to see this effigy. And now, it's a pilgrimage site. And, she holds huge celebrations. I was just there on the last Dia de Muertos. She holds huge celebrations to Santa Muerte. But she's done something amazing in that she's a spiritual leader, but she's not what I would call a spiritual dictator. She's not like,
Hmm.
no offense to those who believe in the Pope, but she's not laying out the law. She's not telling people exactly what they should and shouldn't do. She's very laissez-faire. She lets people practice in their own ways. And if you ask her for advice, she'll give you advice and she'll give you her blessings and guide you and give you life advice. But she's not forcing anybody. She's not trying to sell some kind of fixed way of worshiping Santa Muerte. She just wants Santa Muerte to be respected, adored, venerated. And she is a keeper. She's almost like a modern day Miticasihuatl, who is the keeper of the bones in the underworld.
Hmm.
Here this lady is in a very dangerous barrio, a very dangerous neighborhood of Mexico called Tepito.
Tepito.
And here she is guarding this effigy of Santa Muerte. And the whole place is, it's a pretty dangerous place, and things can kick off, and there are,
Hmm.
rival gangs and cartels. But her shrine is neutral ground. Everybody knows to behave themselves. She is
To
practically
respect it.
untouchable herself. She is respected. She is like a sort of a walking, I would say, almost channel or guide to Santa Muerte. And she's so wonderful. Every time I've gone there, she will keep you safe, especially if she knows you're not around from around there. So during Dia de Muertos, there was so many people there. It was just pullulating with people, hundreds and thousands of people. And she just had me stay close to her because, there are some really intense looking people that will come with, like, those teardrop tattoos and like guns tattooed on their
Mm-hmm.
head. And you're like, okay, I don't think this person is an angel. I know I better watch my back a little bit. But, everybody's respectful and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she is such a good soul, such a beautiful person. She was giving out cake. She ordered loads and loads of cake for the celebrations, and she was giving out cake to everybody who came. And there's a lot of poor people that come, and she had me stand with her, and we had to cut up cake and put it, because there's loads of people coming, put it on trays and give it out to people. Which was really beautiful and really intense for me, because I was quite sick before I went, and I asked someone to do a tarot reading and tell me whether I would be okay, whether I'd be able to make this journey. And they said, yeah, I see you actually being okay, and I see you helping the poor. And I thought, how is this going to look? And then there I was, I found myself at Doña Queta's shrine, her altar in Tepito on Dia de Muertos, giving out cake to the poor. And so I was just like, and this person who read for me is a Santa Muerte devotee. So it was kind of uncanny. So anyway, the thing that really touched me is, yeah, you see people that are really come from very marginalized backgrounds, especially children. And that's really, really hard to see. But here is this amazing, lovely woman that is giving out cake to everybody. And she came from such humble beginnings. I mean, she had nothing. And she had, she was just selling quesadillas. And her husband unfortunately passed away, and, some very sad incidents happened in the family. But she has been kept safe. And not only has she been kept safe, but she is now so powerful. And she has this shop where she sells beautiful statues, such as this one that I picked up.
Oh,
Um,
that's beautiful.
and she kind of hand makes them herself. Every time I
Mm-hmm.
go there, I try to give her a gift of hand cream, because she tells me her hands are always dry, because she buys these statues and then she kind of sticks stuff onto them and kind of makes them herself. She has such
Mm-hmm.
beautiful statues. I brought this one back because it was one of the smallest ones that I could actually fit in my case, but she has ones covered in beadwork. So anyway, so she's gone from this person who, was just had very humble beginnings. And by the way, the tradition of Santa Muerte was always in her family. This got passed down from,
Mm-hmm.
her aunt, her grandmother, it passed down through the female lineage in her family. So she has gone from being this very humble lady that, just lived in this very impoverished area of Mexico City, to becoming, I mean, she's absolutely venerated. People come from far and wide. She was telling me, oh, I get people from Denmark, Japan. You've come, you're from England. I have people come from Poland, Australia. People come from all over, and of course from all over Latin America and the US,
Mm-hmm.
to see her altar, to give homage to that Santa Muerte, and also to receive her blessings. And her blessings are life-changing. I mean, I've had her bless me, and then just things have happened afterwards that were, confirmed to me that I needed, that there was death and rebirth going on, that I needed to get rid of certain
Mm-hmm.
things, certain people, for my life to move on in a positive manner.
That's awesome. I'm actually planning to go to Mexico this year, so I'm looking forward to meeting her, hopefully.
Okay, I am good friends with her son, so please
Good.
let me know.
So,
And I will chat to him. I think he's a lovely, lovely man. And then if you want to go to the altar with him, or he can just,
super.
we can connect with his mom
Uh-huh.
and just ensure, that there's a nice sort of
I'm
homecoming.
honored.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So, if we're talking about a period of time that it was underground, do you want to briefly explain to us how the veneration of Santa Muerte happened? How did it start? How did it transform over the years? Why it went underground until today? Just a brief look to the past.
Okay, Santa Muerte is born in the colony, right? A mixing, and I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, so you can interrupt me at any
Whatever
point.
you want to share.
A mixing of sort of the Grim Reaper being brought by the Spanish to the so-called New World, and I hate to call it that because it's not new at all. It's really old, but that's what people call it. So this figure of the Grim Reaper is brought in. Images of Jesus, Mary, all the saints are brought in to have people apostatize, have them give up their so-called by the colonizers barbaric religions. Obviously, I'm going like that because I don't believe they were barbaric, but that's how they were viewed by the Spanish, right? So they bring in these figures to convert people, but people do not, they don't blindly convert to Christianity. We've seen the same thing with the Vodou faith, right? When people encounter a new religion, it's not just like a file that you download in your computer and it's the same as, wherever the source you got it from. You view concepts that you come across in terms of your cultural background, your cultural topography, right? Your cultural worldview, what we call in social sciences Weltanschauung, which is like a German term, which means the way that you view your world, right? So when people saw the Grim Reaper, they just didn't see it as what the Christian Spanish saw it as, which was a depiction of death, right? A warning that you better confess on your deathbed or you will go to hell, right? So they see her in terms of the death deities that already exist within their spirituality, like Mictlantecuhtli, but there are so many others. The Maya have death deities. There are stories, if you look up the Popol Vuh, about death deities, which, by the way, there's always the owl there. So if anybody's wondering where Santa Muerte got her owl from, it's definitely there. And I have some new work coming out that's going to be looking at that whole ethno-archaeological linkage of her iconography and how that links to indigenous iconography. But let me not go off on a tangent. So anyway, coming back to what we were saying, they see this figure of the Grim Reaper and, they're seeing saints and they're being told this is Santa Marta, Saint Martha, for example. And the Spanish are talking about having una Santa Muerte, which is a good death, a holy death. That is a holy death for the Spanish. Una Santa Muerte is a death where you have confessed. You've been a good boy or girl because you want to get to heaven and you don't want to get to hell, right? So you've confessed for your sins. You've tried not to be naughty, all this and that. And that's what they see as una Santa Muerte. But the indigenous people, because they worship death, for example, Xonexticuecuya amongst the Zapotec is another death deity, female death deity I can give you. Pitaupizalau was a male death deity. I could list you a lot, but let's not go into me showing off how much I know about archaeology. The point is they have a lot of death deities. So they're thinking Grim Reaper, Santa, maybe this is another saint. So they see this figure essentially as another saint. And, in Christian thanatology, death is about the end. It's about fearing going to heaven or hell. Jesus triumphs over death. But within, indigenous traditions, they're not seeing Jesus as triumphing over death. Perhaps they're seeing death as triumphant. And the other thing I want to remind you is, or inform you of, is that, death, as I touched on earlier, is a negative thing within Christianity. It's associated, with hell potentially, with sin. But if we look at Mesoamerican mythology, such as Aztec, Mexica mythology, when the universe is created, Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlan are part of the universe. So that means that the universe cannot exist without death, that death is part of the universe, part of life. This is very different from Christianity, where death only comes after Eve has sinned with Adam in the Garden of Eden. So my point being here that these traditions are taken on in a complete, the Grim Reaper is taken on in a completely different way. given the existing tradition. So people start praying to her Santa Muerte. We have proof in colonial archives that they were turning to her. And, they were even getting high, right? Turning to her, drunk, inebriated. And this was normal because, by the way, while I'm talking about my ethnoarchaeological research, death deities were given pulque. You know what pulque is, right, Ramon?
Yes, yeah. It's like a fermented drink. I don't know much
Liquor.
about it, but I
Yeah,
heard of it.
liquor.
Yeah.
Yeah, made from, I believe, the agave or the maguey. I'd have to
Mm-hmm.
check that, but one of these kind of plants that looks a bit like an aloe vera, in that
Uh-huh.
family. So they would give their death deities pulque. So we find them giving Santa Muerte booze. They were also, by the way, research I did, and stuff will be coming out. I'm writing about all of this because I love this stuff. Um, I'm a bit of a geekette at heart. They were also, even with the Mixtec death goddess, they were communing with her through magic mushrooms, by the way, through
Mm-hmm.
psilocybin. And I have found that there are Santa Muerte devotees still doing that today. So that's kind of harkening back to those traditions. So anyway, getting back to our Spanish, our indigenous people, the Spanish encounter indigenous people worshipping the figure of Santa Muerte. They even encounter curanderos consulting with images. They think that's sinful. They think that's barbaric. So they start punishing these people. They had horrible punishments called auto da fe, which a very wonderful scholar called David Carrasco has written about. I don't know if you know about this.
Autos de fe, of course. They were like public trials. They will burn
Yeah,
people, yeah.
they would burn people. They would punish people. And all
Or
of this,
very public.
very
Very
public,
public.
all of this was part of, I've written about this in my more academic work, what we call an epistemicide, which is, trying to kill off indigenous knowledge, trying to kill off indigenous
Mm-hmm.
spirituality. So by killing people, you're trying to kill off that knowledge. You're trying to punish people for practicing their faith. And we see
Suppressing.
this. We see
You're
this across.
physically eradicating and at the same time suppressing through fear,
Exactly.
it's the spreading of the knowledge.
And the same thing happened in the witch trials, right? If we look at the
Mm-hmm.
witch trials in Europe, and I feel very affected by that, being a lady, of European descent. We had, punishment of women who were also practicing, herbal medicine, worshipping pagan. So it's all part of the same thing of the church machinery, of casting certain spiritualities as heretical, heresy, blah blah blah. So it's all part of the same machinery that seeks to wipe out certain schools of knowledge that compete. They believe are competing, right, with the
Mm-hmm.
church. So anyway, long story short, all of this goes underground because people have been so badly punished. We do see it emerging later on in New Mexico with Doña Sebastiana. But most tellingly, in the 1940s and 50s, we have several anthropologists that document these practices emerging, little prayers. There's not a lot written, but little prayers to Santa Muerte. And what's so interesting to me is that they're prayers written for women to punish unruly, unfaithful men. So, it's about, we're already getting domination here, right? And one of Santa Muerte's names is La Dominadora. She is la jefa. She is la mera, mera
La
muerte,
mera, mera,
patrona,
mera.
la
Uh-huh.
patrona, right? And so when we see figures like Enriqueta Romero being so powerful in Tepito, I think, it's really, there's just an ongoing theme there of empowerment. And also I'm writing about this, and I'll have something coming out on this very, very soon, about cultural resilience as well, about preserving traditions, not letting those indigenous traditions, pride, be quashed, and remaining empowered. And remaining empowered also in our bodies, like I mentioned before, the use of the body, being proud of our body, but perhaps controlling, in the case of these women wanting to control certain bodies. So, I could talk about that all day, but I know you have other questions. So,
No, no, no. It's totally interesting. It's so interesting, and I heard you talk about this transformation of the veneration to death and how Mesoamerican cultures interpreted this figure of the Grim Reaper. I was concerned that people will interpret it as, the emergence of Santa Muerte came from a misunderstanding. But I thought of it further. I understood that it wasn't a misinterpretation, it was more a transformation.
And it's the
Hmm.
same, we see the same kind of thing with Vodou, which is, when
And
the people of
Santeria.
when the people of
Santeria, too.
Africa were deprived of being able to worship under the colonial apparatus their gods, their goddesses, their deities, they still worship them, but using the faces of the saints. So they were
Exactly.
understanding, for example, um,
Santa Barbara with
yeah,
Chango.
yeah,
I'm from Puerto Rico, and Santeria. I mean, Catholicism is very strong in the Caribbean, but there was a period of time, and it's a lot of it underground, where Santeria was practiced. And coming from African traditions, they had to mask it under, Catholic saints. Like Santa
exactly.
Barbara, for example, who in Santeria is Chango,
Mhm.
and same thing with other saints and African deities. It was the same case with Santa Muerte in a way.
Yeah, it was exactly the same. And I believe, or more or less parallel. And, again, hearkening to this ethno-archaeological research that I've done, is that it wasn't only Santa Muerte. For example, amongst the Zapotec people, who I'm very interested in because my sort of adopted grandma, Doña Elena, this Sabia, who just took me under her wing, um, she is Zapotec, so I'm so interested in the
Mhm.
Zapotec, and researching on them and finding about everything I can about them in the past, and current status as well. But I also read about how, because Jesus was imposed upon them, and the Zapotec, they have rich traditions of the hunt in the Sierra, so they weren't allowed to worship their god of the hunt, their deity of the hunt, known as Nosana. So
Mhm.
they went to Jesus in the church because he had some similarities with their god of the hunt, Nosana. He was a kind of creator deity. So they would go to Jesus and they would pray to Jesus, but they were secretly praying to Nosana, using the effigy of Jesus before they went out on the hunt. So it's absolutely not a mistake. It's like you said, it's like a reinterpretation, or using what is there, because humans, we're incredibly adaptable, flexible, and also symbology, within anthropology, we talk about how symbols are multivocal or
Mhm.
polysemantic. That means that a symbol can have multiple meanings for different people, and
Mhm.
also, multiple meanings for the same person. So any symbol within our culture can be reinterpreted by different people. So the skull, for example, if we look at the skull in Christianity, typically it's about, and I have a little skull here, typically it's about memento mori, right? It's about
Mhm.
remember that you will die. They also say sic transit uh, gloria mundi, which means, the world of the glory of the world dies, it's in transit. So
Mhm.
within the Christian traditions, and yeah, a little skull right there as well, within the
Uh-huh.
Christian traditions, the skull is all about remembering finality. Another example is homo bula est. So man is just a
Mhm.
bubble and he will burst,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
You have all these art pictures of people
Vanitas.
by, yeah,
Vanitas.
vanitas, exactly. So all of this is about decay, about death, finality. But skulls, as you know, within the Aztec Maya tradition, they're not about that. They're symbols of
Mhm.
rebirth, of regeneration, and indeed another really interesting mythological story from the Maya, which you'll find in the Popol Vuh, is this character. They call her Blood Clot Girl. Doesn't sound so good in English, but she goes down to Xibalba, the underworld, and there she finds this big tree that's hanging with gourds, and on the tree is hanging a skull. And I can't remember what exactly she does with the skull, but she basically gets pregnant from it, from the skull. So the skull, like the bones for the Aztec, are about rebirth. They're about life. Life is born from death. So, yeah, really interesting mythology there.
It is. That's beautiful. So, looking at the present day, Santa Muerte is often associated with marginalized communities. How has this relationship shaped her global image and devotion?
I think that in some ways it's been good and bad in that, she is really linked to those people who are so close to death. For example, people who live in the streets, people who are
Hmm.
very impoverished, sex workers, narcos, anybody who has a precarious position in life. And I think because of that, the press have pigeonholed her as, as the saint of the dangerous, the evil, the bad,
Hmm.
the criminal, the delinquent. But plenty of other people, and who are overlooked, are living in positions of precarity, like Doña Queta herself, who, lives in this very dangerous barrio, but has surpassed, who could have ever imagined, all expectations of her life becoming this hugely powerful character. So I think that with the marginalized groups, in a way, it's good because they can find empowerment through Santa Muerte. But I also worry that the press tends to pigeonhole her as, related to those groups. And there are certain publications that
Hmm.
I've seen that try to associate her so much with cartels. And a lot of these publications and information don't really delve into the deeper understanding of why those people are in those marginalized situations.
Hmm.
And they also ignore the fact that there are, really famous politicians, mayors in Mexico, and people of power that are also devotees of Santa Muerte. So I sort of worry about this image sometimes because I really don't like the way that the press takes away from the dignity of Santa Muerte devotees and Santa Muerte herself ultimately as well through this imagery.
Yes, definitely the way she's portrayed, but also a lot of these groups and people in general, they not only worship Santa Muerte, they follow Jesus, they follow some other saints, and you never hear that. It's more
Exactly.
focused towards her. She is a powerful image in terms of, her iconography. And I think this reinforces a negative concept of who she is, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And you're so right. These people worship so many other figures and even figures from Santeria, right? But
uh-huh,
yet somehow,
definitely.
and I think it's all related to the Abrahamic fear of death,
Yes.
coming back to the Bible, of the rejection of death as part of life, and the idea that death is macabre and something bad to be avoided. So that's why the press are always fixating on her. Or, for some cheap Hollywood thrill, she'll be, or TV show like Breaking Bad, she'll be brought in to, depict the dark side, the bad side. But I also
Hmm.
think it's a rejection, if we get a little bit deeper in terms of psychology, of also our underworld. And the underworld is a sort of metaphysical concept here of our darker self, our darker sense of self, what
Hmm.
Carl Jung would call our shadow self.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too the fact that she is represents the female power at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
Because you have the Virgin Mary, but she goes and function to Jesus. That they're kind of like there's an association with Santa Muerte. She is a force in itself, independent, all powerful. And I think that threatens the idea of divinity being held by feminine power. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And, in the Abrahamic traditions, it's all about what, Freud would call God the Father, right? And God as the Father is this paternalistic, authoritarian figure, and it's about glorifying certain masculine values. And, and being, even if we look at Mary, I know some people find empowerment within her, but she's always there, as the father, uh, of Jesus, the wife, it's a kind of submissive role. But as you mentioned with
Mm-hmm.
Santa Muerte, she is independent. As a devotee once told me, anda sola sin compromiso. Anda sola sin compromiso. So she's, she's single, walking around free without
No
any
strings attached to
yeah,
anyone
no strings
or
attached
anything.
to anyone. So, and she's also known as a cabrona, a badass. I've even had people
Uh-huh.
call her una chingona, so
Like,
while she can be very motherly and caring, she also is very wrathful, vindictive. And so I think she really embodies a dark feminine that people are, as you said, afraid of. And I think the dark feminine is very different from the figure of God the Father. She's neither is she, strictly a motherly figure that cuddly and cute. Some people have
mm-hmm.
tried to make her cuddly and cute. And I had some people criticize me for my book saying, oh, you're making her sound too scary and formidable. But death is a very intense force. And I want
It
people to
is.
know that and to respect death
Mm-hmm.
and have to understand that she may whop you around the arse if you're not careful. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all of this, like you said, is very scary to people who fear death and who fear the power of the feminine as well. And the dark feminine can be a very scary force and should be. And if we look at, again, the indigenous death deities, they could be quite frightening. Sometimes the female death deities were depicted with claws, like a flayed body.
Mm-hmm.
They were just very intense. So I think there's a fear of death, and like you said, a fear of the feminine, and a fear also of women taking strength
Mm-hmm.
from the power of the feminine to break out of these molds, these patriarchal molds. And indeed anybody, right, breaking out of the mold is, and defying society is scary to the church, to the state. And I found a lot of Santa Muerte devotees are kind of alternative thinkers that are just not going to just swallow government rhetoric, right?
Yep, definitely. Santa Muerte's iconography is rich with a lot of meaning. Can you explain some of the symbols that represent Santa Muerte? Symbols like the scythe, the globe, the lamp, and the owl?
So, for example, let's start with the scythe. So, the scythe typically comes from the Grim Reaper, right? The European depiction of death that comes out of the plague, and for them, the scythe was all about finality. So, how we got to the iconography of the Grim Reaper was that a lot of people were dying during the plague, and so people were imagining a figure that was going around, and let me just grab my little scythe, was going around with a scythe and kind of chopping off people's heads, just like the peasants in the 14th century. They would uh, chop off the heads of wheat, right,
Mm-hmm.
to when they were harvesting the crop. But with Santa Muerte, the scythe becomes a sort of another implement that she's using, not just to, as we said, eliminate things in that terms of that death power, but also to till the earth, to harvest things, to bring about life in, aspects of our life, aspects of our existence that perhaps we need it. Now, the globe is really interesting, and that actually comes from an image of Christ. And, this globus was about his divine power, his dominion, etc. But with Santa Muerte, it's become sort of repurposed in terms of it being about her power over the whole globe, over all of humanity, and everything, flora and fauna, whatever it is on this earth, will die and decay. Even the material objects around us.
Or
A
the
man,
abstract as well. The
yeah,
word ideas, points of view,
yeah,
they have a
books
birth,
like my own,
transformation, and death. Mm-hmm.
books like my own, will just over time, just everything becomes, rubble. And but what's really beautiful, I think, within the Santa Muerte epistemology is that we understand that even though those things die, they have to die so that other things can be
That is,
reborn.
making
Right?
space for other things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the owl, now the owl, people have sort of associated with Minerva's owl of wisdom, but I've done a lot of research on the owl, looking at the codices, looking at archaeological data and documents. And the owl is really linked within pre-Columbian mythology with the underworld as a messenger of the deities of death. And I have been told, so often that the owl is Santa Muerte's messenger. So if you're working with Santa Muerte, an owl comes to your window and starts hooting, it's almost like a shape-shifting type of a shape-shifting kind of energy, in the sense that Santa Muerte can kind of become the owl and deliver messages to you through the owl. Do you want us to pause? I notice your eyes are like tearing up a little bit, or
No, no,
breathing.
no. No,
Okay.
it's actually it was because the way I connected with Santa Muerte was through an owl. And let me share about my story. There was this one time that I started getting messages or watching a video, looking through a book. The image of Santa Muerte came up, and I took it as, she was trying to establish a connection with me. I don't know. There was a something that was opening, in terms of me connecting spiritually with her. My partner and I, every year we do like a big Halloween party. And this one year, we wanted to do like a sugar skull themed Halloween party. And he decided to use a skeleton that we had to decor the front. And out of nowhere, he said, "Why don't we make this skeleton a Santa Muerte?" And that was like, what's going on here? I'm getting like all these influences, all these messages in terms of Santa Muerte. He was the one who suggested it, and he's not religious at all. He doesn't know really about Santa Muerte, but he came up with that. So he decored the skeleton very beautifully with, all the elements, the lamp, the globe. It was so powerful. The only thing that was missing was the owl. And after he made this depiction of Santa Muerte, I was sitting in front of her and I said, "I'm getting like all these messages. Give me a sign that you want to connect with me." And could you believe that this owl flew into the balcony? It was the only element that was missing from the Santa Muerte depiction. It was an owl. And it was the first time in my life that I've seen an owl, and I live in the city. I and here the rarest thing that I've seen is an eagle, but seeing an owl, and like, time stopped right there when I was looking at this owl, and I felt that it was her telling, "This is the confirmation. I want to connect with you." It was, and every time I hear about the owl as a symbol of Santa Muerte, it brings me back to that moment, which it was so powerful and beautiful for me. Getting very emotional because she's brought so much into my life. I've had like so many messages and miracles that she's done, that there's no doubt in my mind and in my heart and in my spirit that she is a force, and she's always there. That's why I got a little bit emotional with the ice. It was because you talking about the owl brought me back to that beautiful moment when I first connected with her.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing with me. Yeah, and the owl absolutely is an indigenous mythology, and also we encounter the owl, in the expression when the tecolote, when it screeches, when the owl screeches, the Indian dies. And I've heard stories about this. I love going to Oaxaca, most of all in Mexico, because that's where mi gente are. But and I'd love to go to other places in Mexico, but there's so much mythology, folklore, stories that you would be told. And last time I was there, so I headed to Doña Queta's for her Dia de Muertos celebration, and then I hopped straight back down to Oaxaca. And even me being in Mexico was a miracle, because I didn't think I was going to go. And I prayed to Santa Muerte, let me go this year to Mexico, but I wasn't sure about finances. I've been struggling a bit with my health, and I didn't know whether I was going to go. And out of nowhere, I got invited to speak at this conference, which wasn't even related to anthropology. It was more about urban landscapes. And they wanted me to speak for Dia de Muertos around that time on the role of Santa Muerte altars in shaping urban landscape. And they said, "We'll pay for your ticket and your expenses to come." So it was just like this this ticket to Mexico just like landed in my lap after I had prayed to her. But anyway, when I was in Oaxaca, I got told so many fantastic stories. And one of them related to the owl, and this time as a messenger of death. My abuelita, as I call her, my Doña Elena, was telling me that, oh, yeah, the neighbor was really, really sad, and so was his wife. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, recently he was coming home, and as he entered into the callejon and into like the alley that goes to his house, he saw an owl and it was really screeching at him. And he had been quite sick, and he just knew it was a sign from la Santa Muerte and from death that he was going to die. And she said that evening he went home, and straight after that he just sat in his chair and he passed away. So
Wow.
yeah, so a very powerful portent, but absolutely can be a confirmation, as you said. And in Oaxaca, they will make the differentiation between the owl that has the two little ears, which is the owl that is said to be Santa Muerte's messenger and doesn't bring death, but is just a messenger. The owls that do not have the tufts, those are the owls that are supposedly a portent of death, an omen that you will pass away. So I think it's really interesting that they make that that differentiation, and then that way you can tell which owl is visiting you. And in Oaxaca, they will talk about the lechuza versus the
Huh?
tecolote. So, you know, what we call the barn owl versus,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, the common owl. And so that's the differentiation that they're making.
I did not know this. I learned something new.
Yeah, I didn't know this either. I'm always learning new things with my people. And the other thing that we should talk about, the scales, right? Santa Muerte often has the
Mm-hmm.
scales of justice.
And the lamp, we haven't talked about the lamp
We'll
either.
get to the lamp. Let's do the
Mm-hmm.
scales. So the
Uh-huh.
scales, you know, is a reminder that justice, first of all, within Santa Muerte is what we call perspectival. That is, it's not, you know, this is not strictly a Christian tradition, like I keep on reminding. Yes, there is Christianity, elements of Catholicism, the Rosario, all of that, and we could talk about that. But, you know, within Christianity, justice is very black and white, good and evil. You know, there are very clear, delineated ideas of justice. Within Santa Muerte, it's really what your idea of justice is as a practitioner. So the scales
Mm-hmm.
are about that, but they're also, I believe, about keeping balance between working light and working dark. If you're just going around hexing people all the time and throwing all this, you know, so-called negative energy into the universe, obviously you can just kind of expect that to come back to
In
you and to
return.
have,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't believe in the law of three, and certainly there are cases where hexing is warranted, because you don't also want to be working in light all the time. If you're, you know, I made that mistake in my practice. You know, I was trying to always do light, always do good, without realizing that sometimes you have to delve into the darkness, that sometimes divine justice, in my opinion, needs to be served. So I think that the scales are also about balancing your practice, right? And some of it perhaps being self-serving, and some of it perhaps being altruistic in the aid of others. Yeah, and I'd say that about all our
That's
energy.
a
You know,
fascinating. That's a fascinating way to put it. That
we have to
sounds
think about our
amazing.
boundaries, right? And that's something
Mm-hmm.
that I've even been working on. The Santa Muerte has taught me very clearly. When I came to I tried to do a lot of service in honor of Santa Muerte, and I really believe that that's important. And Santa Muerte sees that. I've tried to help my communities as much as possible, help devotees. I do tarot, and I charge money for it, but I make an exception if there's missing, murdered people, which there often are in Mexico and other places, you know, especially amongst the Indigenous. There's disappearance of children. I've been consulted on that. I always do those kinds of tarot readings for free. But in the beginning, I was giving away way too much of my energy, and I was just giving a lot of people, you know, and I know a lot of migrants as well in the US who've come from Mexico, you know, who really don't have a lot. And I will always read for those people that I know for free. But in the beginning, you know, I was just reading for everybody at the drop of a hat, giving all this energy away, trying to do all this service for other things as well. You know, I could go into, we had a hurricane in Oaxaca, we had all this stuff that, you know, and I really want to thank the people that donated to that charity to help rebuild the chapel. And all of that is really good. And it is essential, I believe, that we do service. But if you do too much for other people all the time, you start to be very drained. you become a sort of, it's almost like a people pleaser thing where you're just trying to please people, make people happy all the time. And I think the scales for me has become about that as well, about preserving my power, doing things that put me in my power, that serve my higher self, not just other people all the time.
That's amazing. And it's so true. I mean, if you think about it, my grandmother used to say in Spanish, it might not translate the same in English, but she used to say, being good is good, but being too good is not good.
Yeah, and
And it's
something
true.
like that has definitely taught me that lesson. So let's come to the light. It's important for us,
Yes.
yes, to be the light. And I think that her lantern is about her also illuminating our lives and showing us the path that we have to
Mm-hmm.
take. And it's also a reminder that even in the darkest times, and a lot of us come to Santa Muerte through darkness. I came to her through darkness. Nearly dying was what really put me on my path with her. And I know, so many people have suffered in innumerable ways, whether it's with cancer, or some other sickness, whether it's with, a horrible breakup or a divorce, a business going bust. So many people come to her when they're just hitting rock bottom, in depression, when they can't go on. But that lantern is a reminder that there's just always light, even in the darkest of times. And just even lighting that little, even if it's a tiny little tea light on your altar, can just help you to have that strength, and ask her to have that strength to continue on in those dark and difficult times.
It seems that there's a lot of confusion with the iconography in terms of Santa Muerte. Not all skeletal figures with a cape covered is Santa Muerte. There's a very clear differences between the Green Reaper, Santa Muerte, San La Muerte, which is another saint that is venerated more towards South America, and La Catrina. What do you feel are these aspects that sets her apart from these archetypes?
Well, I want to say that first of all, it's interesting. San La Muerte is like a male skeletal figure from, especially from, he's being worshipped in
Argentina.
Argentina and Paraguay.
Hmm.
And, the church hasn't gone after him. The media, you don't see media stories about him all the time. Why? Probably because he's male, right? In my opinion.
Mm,
Um,
interesting. Mhm.
so there's that, first of all, that I just wanted to add as a little segue. But I think Santa Muerte is very different. La Catrina is just really a depiction by this artist called Jose Posada, who,
Posada.
under the regime of Porfirio Diaz, who, while he did a lot for Mexico and modernized it, it was often at the expense of indigenous people. And he was living this high life, and going to Paris. And so La Catrina was actually a depiction by Jose Posada, who was a satirical cartoonist. He was critiquing the regime and reminding Porfirio Diaz by depicting this woman in a really fancy hat. Even your wife will die, even you will die for all your trips to Paris and your fancy fashion. You too will die, and death is democratic, right? Death doesn't differentiate. Although, we have to add there, even though we can say death is democratic, people who are in spaces, as we mentioned earlier, of marginalization, impoverishment, are more likely to die faster, younger, etc. So
Hmm.
she's really not a spiritual figure at all, and she's kind of been repurposed for Dia de Muertos, and is now a sort of icon of Mexican culture. So that's La Catrina. Who else do we have? Grim Reaper, right? We already discussed that. Really, just a depiction of death within Christianity. San La Muerte, a male figure who's more turned to sort of for protection and revenge. He really doesn't have the same qualities, multifaceted abilities, and powers that Santa Muerte has. He doesn't come in all these different
Hmm.
robes. There's certainly no siete potencias of San La Muerte. So she is so unique, uh, amongst all these figures.
And she is not purely a Catholic figure either, right? Even
Yeah.
though a lot of people who venerate her actually follow Catholicism, but she's not tied up necessarily to the religion, right?
No, and I think that there's a great panoply of devotees of Santa Muerte, in terms of, some of them see themselves as Catholic and identify as
Hmm.
Catholic, like Doña Elena, the lady who has guided me the most on my path. I believe she identifies as Catholic. Yuri Mendez identifies as Catholic. But, Soraya Arredondo, for example, she identifies as pagan. And there are plenty of people who identify as pagan and non-Catholic and who turn to Santa Muerte out of disappointment in God. So, there's a sort of whole range. And that's the beautiful thing about Santa Muerte, is that there is what we call heteropraxy. That means, faith is not codified in these very strict and structured ways. People are repurposing, reworking, reimagining Santa Muerte, according to, like I said, their cultural background, their needs, their understandings.
Yeah, definitely. And you were talking how a lot of people come, to Santa Muerte in moments of hitting rock bottom, when their ego is dissolved, these difficult moments. So one of the most compelling aspects of Santa Muerte is her role with emotional healing and shadow work. How does she support devotees in facing their fears and personal struggles?
So there are two aspects to this, and we can sort of get into the shadow work stuff in a second. But yeah, when people are hitting rock bottom, sometimes parts of themselves need to die. As we were talking about earlier with the snake analogy, sometimes parts of you need to be shed to be reborn. When you've faced a toxic relationship, or your business has broken down, or you've had health problems, you need to allow yourself to process that trauma, to understand what went wrong. Perhaps you need to let go of certain habits to be reborn. And Santa Muerte can really, really give us the strength to do that, because of this non-dualistic epistemology, that things must die to be reborn, that from death comes creation, but understanding that it can be extremely painful. When Jesus died on the cross, whether you believe in that story or not, it's a wonderful analogy. It was very painful, right? He was crucified. He had these nails in his hands and in his feet. He was bleeding. He'd been betrayed by Judas. It was a horrible, horrible time for him. And it can be really hard. It can be really, really painful when we literally go into our own underworld, right? We can understand it as an underworld moment where, we go into the deepest, darkest recesses of our soul, of ourself, and we
Go
have
within.
we have to go within. And I've been doing all this work, also research on shamanism, curanderismo, because that's very tied to Santa Muerte, especially in indigenous regions where people work with Santa Muerte, such as Oaxaca. And in shamanism, there is an understanding that the shaman must die. The shaman must go through solitude and suffering to be reborn, to gain wisdom. It's not through, we can learn through play and playfulness. Often it is in those deepest, darkest moments of the soul that we come to these realizations. And this can have a profound influence on our lives, such as me writing Secrets of Santa Muerte. If I hadn't bled out, which I did, and suffered immensely on a hospital bed, perhaps I wouldn't have had this theophany, and the Theo here referring to Santa Muerte as in THEA, because she's female. But I also think we can do shadow work with Santa Muerte. And what is shadow work? Shadow work is accepting the dark parts of ourselves that we keep hidden. And, I work with clients doing tarot, doing trance work for people to encounter their shadow. So Carl Jung, right, student of Sigmund Freud, was a famous psychologist. And he said, all of us have a shadow self. We have a sort of dark side that we keep repressed, that we keep hidden from the world. And often we do that because we fear society, right? And we fear being judged. And often these shadow selves, they're often linked to trauma, not always, but giving an example of myself. So I grew up in, two British parents, very strict, old-fashioned upbringing. and as a girl. And so I got what we call good girl conditioning, right? Always be well behaved, don't be angry, don't speak out of term. And anybody who's been in an abusive relationship or had abusive parents or difficult childhood, I think, can relate to this. We get trained to repress certain emotions, to not speak our truth and say what we really feel, and that can just really, really hinder us. And so, this is an example linked to trauma, but as I said, it doesn't need to be linked to that. So growing up, I never felt that I could speak my truth. And, and I would often have this typical rhetoric of, oh, you dumb bitch, right? Women get a lot of that, oh, you dumb bitch, right? That's a nice insult, not that, that is frequent. And we've all been treated as stupid. So I started to just get a lot of anger in myself, but I would repress it, right? And so then you can become quite passive aggressive when you're upset, but you don't really voice what you're feeling. And through me, even before I came to Santa Muerte, now I'm doing deeper work with her, I didn't realize, but I started to do my own shadow work. So I had a lot of anger in me, but while I was in this very patriarchal society, and I don't want to say all men are bad, because it was actually a man that helped me, Dr. Francis Heiligan, thank you, who helped me recognize that I was very gifted, that I was very intelligent, something which I had always denied myself because I had been told to shut up, not have an opinion, dumb bitch, stupid woman, right? Don't talk, you don't have an opinion. So I started doing my studies, and I found that I had all this anger, but I could transmute this anger and turn it into gold, which is the point of shadow work, is to take the dark parts of us and make them into something good. So anger can become passion about something, right? It can become, and for me, my passion was writing, creativity. And so I began to write about all sorts of things. And eventually, coming to Santa Muerte, she made me understand that I wanted to write about her, but also write about devotees who had experienced injustices and talk about that. So I transmuted my anger into passion. And I've written in more academic work about femicide and how Santa Muerte devotees, women, turn to Santa Muerte to deal with the anger that they face around femicide, doing a sort of shadow work through that. Through their approach with her, and also gaining strength with her, for example, to organize as groups to search for the bodies of disappeared, to organize rosarios in honor of deceased women. So for me, that shadow work is very personal, but I know of other devotees, and shout out to Simon de Luna, who've also done shadow work with her. For example, I'm sure he won't mind me telling his story. He was also feeling his own anger for other reasons. And I don't want to get into his personal story, but he told me about his way of kind of working with that rage, working with that passion, was he got really into MMA and, sports, which is something that I can relate to because, I vent as well at the gym. So, it's all about identifying trauma. But also we can work with Santa Muerte in rituals to summon our shadow selves, or to communicate with our shadow selves, or explore our shadow selves, and go to the point of, where does that anger or feeling or desire originate from? And if it comes from an experience of anxiety or panic or distress, we can also go to our younger self who experienced that and ask for Santa Muerte to, to hold our hand through this experience, to allow us to perhaps say whatever it is that we needed to say to our younger self, or have Santa Muerte say it to our younger self. Now, there are many ways of working around this, and it really depends, obviously, on the individual, because we're all very unique, although we're all just walking skeletons, which is what Santa Muerte reminds us of. But we really can work with her to process these deep desires, and they can actually become tools and superpowers even to help us. And honestly, when I write from the heart, and I write from even a place of great darkness that I have experienced, sometimes that's just my most powerful writing. And I think that Secrets of Santa Muerte hopefully is proof of that, because I was just channeling that passion, that just all these feelings that I've had, trying to create something good from that.
It definitely, and it shows, it's transformative, and it's been a work. This book has been amazing. With my personal experience with Santa Muerte, my devotion, and I'm sure it's been the same case with everybody who comes across it. Um, how does she guide devotees and their understanding of afterlife and connections with their ancestors?
Well, I think like Mictica Sihuatl, and coming back from, to almost the Day of the Dead traditions, which are all linked to this, right? Mictica Sihuatl, the other death deities, were essentially, they presided over the land of the dead. They provided portals to the world of the dead. And Santa Muerte can take on that same role, both as a psychopomp, but also as a channel to the world of the dead. And, I've encountered in many altares in Mexico, people put pictures of their dead, in the altar, because they want to connect, render homage to their dead. So we can definitely work with Santa Muerte. I mean, perhaps you might want to work with her in her bone form or her black form, but really in any color, we can connect to the dead, we can talk to the dead, and we can also find peace in knowing that they're in the tender and loving embrace of her bony arms.
That is so beautiful and it's so true. What are some of the most memorable or profound stories that you encountered about Santa Muerte's intervention, with you, with other people?
I mean, just talking about the dead, I've had people tell me about them turning to Santa Muerte to especially talk to deceased mothers. And I had a devotee tell me about her mother passing and her not being able to say everything that she wanted to her mother. So she went to her altar of Santa Muerte, and she had that frank conversation that she really always wanted to have with her mother. She told her she loved her. She told her she missed
Wow.
her, that she wished she was there. And she lit a candle in her mother's honor, and served a drink for Santa Muerte, and served a drink for her mother, and then also a drink for herself, as if they were just all there together. And that very night, she had a dream of Santa Muerte talking to her, and suddenly Santa Muerte appeared with the face of her mother and
Wow.
spoke to the devotee and spoke back to her and said, I love you too, mija. And, said all these kind, comforting words that she really, really needed to hear. And that story just touched me so profoundly. And I think, this was evidence that Santa Muerte was channeling the spirit of her mother.
hmm Wow, that's so powerful and it's so beautiful. For those people who wish to
Absolutely.
deepen their relationship with Santa Muerte, what advanced rituals or ceremonies in general do you recommend?
I just think that you should pray daily. I mean, ideally once in the morning, once at night, but I would say once a day. And even if you can't go to your altar, she understands. Sometimes my most deepest prayer is just when I'm lying in bed before I'm going to sleep. I just lie there, and, I don't even need to put my hands together. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And just in my head, I pray to her, and I might start with something like, Santa Muerte de mi corazón, no me desempares de tu protección, but then Santa Muerte de mi amor, and start. Then from that prayer, I will just, because I know all these prayers in Spanish, and you don't have to do that, just ad lib. But then from that prayer, I just tell her about my day, and I tell her about the things I'm grateful for, the things that I am hopeful for. And, even from a psychological point of view, if we want to rationalize this, these are moments of catharsis. These are moments of reflection. These are moments that can really bring us, is proven, great peace within ourselves. Another thing I like to do is, if I'm not sure of what prayer, sometimes I take my book or another book, and I do what we call, bibliomancy, or, this is what,
Heliomancy. Uh-huh.
yeah. And I'll just be like, okay, what prayer does my hand fall to today? And then I'll just
Which
see.
I opened it. Which one did you get? I got prayer of gratitude. And we were
Okay,
just talking about being grateful in your prayers when talking to her. And this is what I opened: prayer of gratitude, which
that's
is a really
beautiful.
beautiful one. Would you allow me to read it?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Prayer of gratitude. O Santa Muerte, powerful skeletal spirit, your bountiness is vast. Your intervention is efficient. Humbly, I thank you for all you have done for me. I thank you for your spiritual favors that you promised and gave me. I thank you and ask you that you keep protecting me and those around me. I name you my advocate, and I hope my advocate you will remain, that no one may harm me. And if they seek to send me evil, may that be returned to them. Thank you, Santa Muerte. Amen. That is
Amen.
so beautiful. And it's true, and you were talking about that earlier, that balance between goodness and evil, about the light and shadow. And it's reflected here in this prayer as well. You're thanking for everything you have, but at the same time, you're asking her to be that protector and to deflect back any negativity or evil that is wished upon you.
Mhm.
And it's that gratitude for what you have, but also for the fact that she is there to protect you.
Mhm. And I think Santa Muerte ultimately, the beauty of the spirituality is that she is, whether people know it or not, death is everybody's mother. Death is the
Hmm.
universal mother because we all, we came from a woman and we return to a woman. We return to death. We return to her arms. She's with us at our side always. And, we don't know when we will be joined with her permanently, but that is the only truth in everybody's life. And no matter who we are, we will be accepted in that skeletal embrace at the end of our existence. So, whether people want to be spiritual with it or not, or perhaps be more philosophical, from a philosophical point of view, death is the only truth that we have in this world. People will say death and taxes, but there's always these richos tax. So, people can evade taxes, but you just can't evade death. So, I think that's the big takeaway for me, whether you want to get into practice or not, is
Hmm.
is to just recognize that death is an integral to existence. And even throughout our lives, we're going through small deaths. We're so different this year than we were, say, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. What things have had to die in our life? What things have we had to let go of? What relationships? What habits? Where have we felt that we have completely changed or gone through some major transformation? So we're constantly dying and being reborn. And I think that is also the message of Santa Muerte, like the snake shedding its skin. We must learn to die and be reborn, or we get stuck in these very negative patterns. And when I think of people who have serious addictions, for example, to drugs, which is absolutely tragic. And I've met Santa Muerte devotees who have problems with drugs and turn to her for protection. But at the same time, there is a need there to do deeper shadow work, because often we're using addictions and it can be to anything, as excuses to not face our true self. And I think that's also a message of Santa Muerte, to strip everything back to the skeleton. What are you
Hmm.
left with, And to confront that, to confront your deepest, darkest fears, your past, and to try and be reborn. Because if you carry that around with you all the time, or you're trying to escape from it all the time, you can't really progress into the next chapter of your life. So that is something that she has taught me very radically sometimes. And sometimes her lessons can be tough. Sometimes she is that cabrona that will just whip me on the ass because I have not understood the lesson, and she's going to remind me of it. And she can be a tough teacher, but she is an excellent teacher and guide, and mistress of the dark, that guides us also to light when we are in that depth
Hmm.
of despair and darkness. And often when we find ourselves in the darkness, we do need to reflect most deeply on what it is that we must let go of, what it is we must shed today.
Definitely. And I had those experiences myself, moments that She's reminding me to be back in my place, follow the path, and, you know, very significantly, and everyone can work with her, because
Yeah.
she is part of our existence. What are some of the ethical considerations that devotees should keep in mind when working with Santa Muerte?
I mean, like I said, I don't think people should just be hexing willy nilly all over the place. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can, but you have to be aware that when you're hexing someone, sometimes you need to think about, well, how was I responsible for this situation? And if you were responsible for a situation that went bad or someone that you're angry at, chances are that if you hex that person, something will come back to you. Now, I've had situations where I've hexed people. I'll be honest, I hexed people and nothing bad happened because they just bloody well deserved it and were asking for it, you know? And so it kind of re-equilibrated the universe, which was kind of out of sync. The other thing I would say is to be respectful towards other devotees. I've seen a lot of disrespect in the Santa Muerte community, especially online, which really saddens me. People thinking that they know better than another, that they're better than other people. You know, the lesson of Santa Muerte is that we are all equal before death. We're all walking skeletons. People also trying to create rules and regulations and making this into a closed practice, or trying to say, oh, you know, you're not allowed to worship death. I mean, everybody dies. The only people that would be
Mm-hmm.
immune from this would be potentially vampires, if you believe in them, if you believe in immortality. You know, maybe they wouldn't be an ideal candidate. I don't know. Maybe they are because, you know, they're drinking blood. So, but I'm just, it bewilders me that people would want to do that. And I also think, you know, we should try to avoid, of course, exploitation around death. I mean, obviously, I made money from my book. I wouldn't deny that. But like I said, I've always tried to reinfuse into the Santa Muerte community to do service, to do aid.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, everybody has their own path. Some people want to tread a more selfish path. And ultimately, you know, death doesn't judge. I'm not going to judge you. People are going to live their life the way they're going to live their life. But
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, it just doesn't sit right with me to be selfish in your practice all the time. Like I said, I do think that there should be a balance, and I do think that there should be respect as well, of course, for the people of Mexico, and to have a basic knowledge about, you know, Mexican culture, where Santa Muerte hails from as well, and her people, because occasionally I've seen people that just have some points of view that really are not respectful or misunderstand, or even just coming out of ignorance. And, you know, I understand people don't have access to everything. They don't speak Spanish. But the other day, someone said to me, oh, Doña Queta, isn't she dead? And I thought, no, you're thinking about, okay, Enriqueta Romero is very different from Enriqueta Vargas, who was the leader of Santa
Uh-huh.
Muerte Internacional, who did die. Now, I
Yes.
understand maybe people can get confused about things, but I do feel if you're a Santa Muerte devotee and you want to talk about these things, just go and do a little bit of research, you know, on the
Yeah.
internet. It's not
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's not rocket science.
There's a lot of resources available. They're
Yeah.
very
And
different
really,
characters.
you don't even need to buy
Mm-hmm.
my book. You know, you just go onto, well, I don't recommend Wikipedia because, you know, people just write a lot of whatever they want to write. So,
Mm-hmm.
but, you know, there are a lot of sites dedicated to Santa Muerte, and, you know, groups that you can find where you can ask people, websites. It's just really easy to Google stuff. No, so the other thing I wanted to say about respectful and ethical behavior is just respect towards
Mm-hmm.
Santa Muerte. You know, approaching death respectfully. This is not a game. You know, there are some people who think this is a throwaway faith, that you could just go to your altar or petition Santa Muerte once in a while, that it's a game. It's just not. Working with
It's
death is
not.
she's a very powerful force. And, you know, if you don't even need to imagine her as this gowned force, just imagine her as this gowned figure. Just imagine Santa Muerte as the death force that runs through the universe, and the life force. You know, death and life are very intense and very painful, potentially, experiences. I mean, some people do
Mm-hmm.
pass in peace, but some people die in very dramatic, intensely painful ways. Labor, giving birth to a child, is incredibly painful. You know, the baby comes out crying. You know, that's a very intense shock for that baby being
Mm-hmm.
cast into the universe from the safety of the womb, which, by the way, in, you know, pre-Hispanic mythology is the womb is the underworld, right?
Mm-hmm.
In associations that you look at. So life and death are very intense forces. So I always urge people to work respectfully with Santa Muerte. That to me is primordial. As to breaking up a relationship with death, again, some people criticize me for that, but people criticize you for anything, so it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to offer people, of course, you can never end your relationship with death because we're all beings towards it.
Eventually. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But at the same time, there are people who don't have time for that commitment. There are people whose lifestyles are perhaps not correlated to keeping an altar, to keeping it tidy, to venerating Santa Muerte every day. And simply, there are people who have written to me and told me I just couldn't connect with her. I don't know what I was doing wrong, but I couldn't connect with her. So I decided to end my relationship with Santa Muerte, which I understand that is your decision. So I wanted to give people a ritual of respect that they could do instead of tossing their Santa Muerte items, you know, into the trash, which would be so disrespectful and
Mm-hmm.
horrible. Of course, you can give them away to someone who's going to care for them and preserve them. But if you don't have that option, I wanted to give people an option because I have heard stories in Mexico of things going badly for people who disrespected death. So, for example, I was told this story by this senora of her son. Her son was a devotee of Santa Muerte. After his first wife died, he decided to dedicate himself to death, and he had a very active practice and was very bonded with her. And eventually he turned to La Niña Roja, Red Santa Muerte, looking for love and to find a new lady for his life, which he did. And Santa Muerte, you know, delivered this lovely lady to his door, to his life, and he married her and they settled down. But she wasn't a devotee of La Santa, and so over time his altar got dusty. He wasn't really praying on a daily basis, and he just thought, you know what, I'm just going to put these away in a box. And he did. He put his items away in a box, forgot about them. He tossed some of them out, you know, into the
Wow.
rubbish. And lo and behold, one day this lovely wife had a terrible accident, and it just hit him. He realized I had promised Santa Muerte all these gifts. I had promised her I would pray to her if I found the love of my life, which I did, and I completely didn't go through with it. I ignored her, I neglected her, and I did not make good on my promises. And he realized that this accident was a warning from her. So he had to make a decision, you know, was he going to do a ritual to no longer work with her, or was he going to restart his altar? So I didn't want to I didn't want to have people find themselves in these kinds of situations and not know how to disrespectfully
Mm-hmm.
part ways with death, which is why I included that ritual.
Yeah, yeah, that was amazing. And like I said, it's groundbreaking because it helps people bring that closure in cases, it's not for everyone. Sometimes it's not the right moment either, but you have to close, that connection. You can't leave it open. It's like tossing to the trash a hot pan. It could cause fire. You have to find the proper way how to channel back that energy and close it in a respectful way.
Absolutely. And some people just don't communicate with her or find ways to communicate with her, and that's perfectly fine. Other people do, like yourself, and have these amazing omens and signs. And in Oaxaca, she even one of the main santas, which is the oldest one in the chapel. I'm just so, like I said, I've been to many chapels, but that chapel is really special to me, and it is definitely, it has a portal there. And
Oaxaca.
Doña Elena even told me that they dug a hole because the curandero told her that Santa Muerte baja y sube, she goes up and down from the underworld at night, and sometimes goes down to cure the souls of the dead. But also, I've had many people tell me about, there's this one statue in the capilla, in the chapel, that is really the oldest one, the one that was there from the beginning. And she is very special because they sadly have hurricanes there once in a while. And when they first got this Santa, they didn't really know what to do with her. So Doña Elena had been very sick, her son as well. It's a long story, but Santa Muerte had delivered holy healing. And in fact, she came to Doña Elena in the form of an owl as well. She came, there were two, an owl, and it was drawing a carriage, and Santa Muerte was riding on it. And she came and she cured Doña Elena from an illness that she had had for like 12 years. She had been lying supine in her bed. And Santa Muerte came to her, death came to her, but not as she expected, not to take her to the other side, but to heal her. She offered her holy healing. So they got this huge statue, but they didn't know. And she also cured the son from witchcraft, which is a whole other story that I won't get into. So they got this huge statue and they didn't know what to do with it. So they just kept it kind of outside, and people would put ofrendas and, you know, give libations and flowers and all this stuff. And then one day a hurricane hit and the whole place was decimated and destroyed and devastated, apart from the statue of Santa Muerte, which stayed upright through the whole thing and was uninjured. And then after that, people came around from all around the community, and it was really incredible because a lot of, it shows you what's happening with faith, a lot of the chapels to God, to Jesus, to Mary were just full of debris and nobody. But this chapel, this statue, because it wasn't even a chapel, to Santa Muerte, people were so touched by this miracle and needed her strength so much that the whole community came together and they built a chapel around her. You know, people, just men came, women came, everybody was working together. Some people bought bags of concrete, other people bought paint. And so they started this chapel, which now has many other santas in it. But this particular statue, this, you know, she's a milagrosa, a miracle kind of worker. She has been cited by so many people walking the highways, delivering messages. She goes into people's houses at night. For example, there was this lady and she was a devotee, and she had had an abusive boyfriend that had previously hurt her and hurt her children. And so she had turned to Santa Muerte for protection and for strength. And this boyfriend told his mom, who was a friend of mine, that when he would stay the night at her house, he would hear this sound when he was sleeping every night. So every night he would spend there. So one night he went out of his room at night to see what was going on, what this noise was. And it was Santa Muerte walking down the corridor, protecting the room of the children. And the sound was the scythe.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
you hear a lot of stories about Santa Muerte going around. She's been seen taking a taxi, like just so many stories about her leaving the chapel at night to go and do the work that she does. So, yeah.
The statue itself.
The statue itself. And she's even spoken to people. They've taken phone calls in or around the chapel, and she has literally spoken to them on the phone and given them messages that they needed to hear. So her presence is really, really strong there. There are just certain chapels that I feel the presence is particularly strong, or where I've bonded more strongly with the santas, and I have a very deep connection there. I think it's because I've spent so much time there and I've done more rituals there than in any other chapel. So I've just really bonded with, you know, sometimes we just bond with the santas, and I want to tell your listeners, just pay attention to which santa you bond with. You know, people often tell me, why am I bonding more with this statue or another? often it's because you need that power or you need that presence in your life. What colors are you drawn to? Pay attention to that. That is Santa Muerte's way of telling you perhaps the energy that you need in your life.
Yeah, part of the iconography, there's different colors of Santa Muerte representing
Yeah,
different things
yeah,
also.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Red,
and that's
love, right?
hmm
White for peace and purity, for healing. Obviously, I have the purple Santa Muerte on my book because I am so
yes.
drawn to purple Santa Muerte. Um, and I want to thank occasionally people send me beautiful things. I want to thank the person that sent me this purple Santa Muerte statue because she's so, so beautiful.
hmm
Um, and purple obviously is the color of magic, mystery, of course, of healing, but also connecting to the astral and cosmic realms and doing, she's la hechicera, she's la bruja, she's the witch
hmm
woman, the sorceress Santa Muerte. So I am just so deeply bonded to Santa Muerte in her purple robe.
Yeah. And your book goes in detail with the color correspondences, not only the primary, but also secondary colors. So if you want to learn more about the different colors of Santa Muerte and what they represent, definitely you need to get this guide. Where can people find your book?
They can find it in any good bookstore, Amazon.com. All the major retailers have it online, and Amazon will deliver it in 1 to 3 days, depending on where you're living. So you can get that
hmm
easily. I also am on Instagram. I'm sometimes on TikTok, and I do share prayers. I try to regularly share prayers because I know that people need prayers. And if people don't have money to buy books, there are always prayers. And I've been trying now more recently to post more tips and information about working with Santa Muerte and just images as well from
hmm
Mexico, because Santa Muerte is so beautiful. It's such a deeply visual faith as well.
Yeah, and I follow you on Instagram, and the photos are beautiful. And I'm gonna share below um, places where you can get the book. Amazon. It's also available as an audiobook through Audible. I'm
Yeah.
gonna share the links for anyone who's interested in this guide because it's amazing. And I'm telling you, I love this book. I go back to it so often, and it's enriched my devotion to Santa Muerte. So thank you for this amazing gift that you brought into the community and shared this knowledge and your beautiful experience with the world.
Well, it's thanks to Santa Muerte. I really, she
Mhm.
has to take credit for it. And while the Audible is good, the one thing I do think that it's nice about having the paper book is that with the Audible, it's harder to get access to the prayers because it's just
The
someone reading.
prayers, yes. Yeah, yeah,
So
it definitely is. I use it in the background and I always pick up something new, which is amazing. Any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with about Santa Muerte's evolving role in the modern world?
I think that she's just going to be with us for as long as we are extant. Santa Muerte will be with us because, as long as there are humans, there's going to be death. So I think
Exactly.
that her role is just going to evolve, and we're just going to see more sides to her, and hopefully learn more and more lessons from her and about her, and especially about ourselves as well.
Exactly. You just took the words out of my mouth. Any new projects coming up that you want to share with us?
I'm a little bit of a secretive lady, which is why it's kind of hard for me to be on Instagram and TikTok, and I'm not the best at always posting everything because I would really just like to be a jungle witch and
Uh,
just be in my cabin in the jungle woods and do my spells and prayers. So I kind of am more of a secretive type. So yes, there are things on the horizon. Just stay tuned. There will be things coming up.
and we're all looking forward to see them. Thank you very much, Dr. Stone. It's been an amazing pleasure talking to you. I was a little bit nervous at first because, your book has had such a great impact. I see you as a celebrity,
Very
and
touched.
talking with you. Yeah, I was so looking forward to it. But talking to you, it's deepened not only through the book but in person too. Through this interview, I picked a lot of new things that will definitely enrich my life and hopefully with the people who are watching it as well. So thank you very much for your contribution, for sharing your time with us, your beautiful energy, and I hope to have you back again when those new projects materialize.
Thank you so much, Ramon. I would ask that perhaps you and I can lead some kind of prayer to the
Hmm.
listeners that want that. For anybody else, who's just listening out of curiosity, feel free to turn it off. But I always feel with Santa Muerte, we should honor her in prayer and
Yes.
hopefully bring some kind of positive energy. So
Will you
if
do
you
us the honors since you're
I would like you to
please?
join in with me so that I'm not
Mm-hmm.
doing this solo,
Mm-hmm.
because we have masculine and feminine energy here. We can kind of multiply what we're doing, and since we're both devotees, I think that would be really beautiful. So I will
Definitely.
start
Thank you.
again, because we any excuse to get out my death paraphernalia. I will just invite your listeners to close their eyes at this point and to join us in a meditative prayer. Querida Santa Muerte, dear Santa Muerte, Holy Mother of healing, of light, of darkness, and all that is in this world, I thank you for your presence, and I thank you for all opportunities that you have given us today to spread your wisdom, to spread your knowledge, to spread your insight through this podcast. And I ask that all listeners who require it at this time receive the healing, receive the spiritual guidance, receive the insight, dreams, and any other wisdom and knowledge they are seeking through your power, through your grace, and through your presence at this time and whenever they need it. So mote it be. Amen. Ramon, do you have anything to add?
Yes. Santísima Muerte, my beloved guardian, with a grateful heart I come before you. Thank you for your love that surrounds me, for your guidance that lights my path, for your blessings that fill our hearts, and for the protection that keeps us safe. You're always near through every joy and every struggle, offering comfort, wisdom, and strength. I trust in your care, in your presence, knowing that you walk with us, unseen but always faithful. Santísima Muerte, I ask not just for myself, but for all those hearts that are searching. Open their eyes to your kindness, open their hearts to your embrace, so they may know the love and peace that you bring. May your name be spoken with reverence, your presence be felt with love, and your blessings reach all of those who call upon you. Thank you, my Santísima Muerte, for all that you have done, all you do, and all that you will do. I honor you today. We honor you today and always. Amen.
Amen. So mote it be.
That was so powerful. Thank you very much again for your beautiful energy, for your contribution, Dr. Stone, and for your love, because this is an act of love. Sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and your energy comes from the heart, and I feel it through this book. To everyone watching, please follow Dr. Stone. She's on Instagram. I'm going to post the links below to her book where you can find her, and we are looking forward to hear back again from you. And
Thank
as
you.
always, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody who's watching. And as always, blessings to all.
Blessings to all. May we all
Bye.
find death in that which we don't need and rebirth in that which we do need.
Amen. Bye to everyone. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up.
Leave us a comment and share it with someone who might benefit from it. And click the subscribe button for more future videos about tarot, divination, and other esoteric topics.